Hello and welcome once again to College Success Skills. It's Monday. It's me, Mr. Fowler, your inimitable host, and here we are once again. Today we're talking about College Success Strategies, Chapter 11. Now, I know I'm driving you crazy, probably bouncing around all over the place with all of these different chapters. So, just realize that there's a method, or at least I believe there's a method to my madness. And I think that going through today's PowerPoint presentation will reveal some of that methodology. But speaking of, let's get to the PowerPoint. I see slideshow from the beginning. So you see me over here in your upper right-hand corner of your screen. I'm glad to see you. Let's go over the session notes. We're going to start today with a little preview / review, as we typically do. Just 10 minutes out of your class time, recounting some issues regarding the previous chapter, Chapter 7, called Just What Do You Believe Anyway? I want to spend a few moments talking about that. Then we're going to move on to the Chapter 11 lecture, which should take about 25 minutes, more or less. Today's chapter number 11 is over rehearsal, which I know sounds like something out of a, I don't know, humanities or acting arts class, but rehearsal is actually in reference to the process by which students review and practice encoding information. So that's what we're going to talk about as part of the main focus for today. Then I'm going to wrap up with a few reminders, which I will touch upon real quickly right here. Don't forget to complete your Week 8 discussion questions in the weekly forums. And then, of course, you have a quiz this week, quiz number 4, coming at you over last week's content, chapters 6 and 7. Okay, so that's what's on our agenda today. Let's pause for just a few seconds to think about chapter 7. Just what do you believe anyway? In terms of reviewing the content for chapter 7, remember that chapter 7 had a long title. It was subtitled Motivations, Attitudes, and what was it? Motivations, Attitudes, and Interests. So chapter 7 was kind of focused on what those three things have to do with one another. And without being overly complicated, essentially it said that if you have a positive attitude about learning, that your motivation to learn will be exponentially higher. Not exactly mind-blowing material. That seems to make a certain amount of sense, doesn't it? That if you're more interested in a piece of content, or that if you feel that you believe you're competent or even gifted in a particular area, your tendency to pick up that material and perform at an exponentially higher rate is more likely. Again, that's one of the theoretical chapters about this book that, while I don't disagree with it, I question how valuable that information is for college students. Honestly, if you haven't really already figured that out after 12 years or more in our education system, I don't know that reading about it in a chapter in this book is going to change your life all that much. But I appreciate the ideas that Holkuch and Nisteljelnik are, sort of putting out there for us to consider. In terms of how valuable that is, again, I said this last week and I'll reiterate it now. It's a theory, okay? So I don't know that I prescribe to that theory. There were lots of courses in college that I had to take that were required, that were supposed to expand my view about college and life and the principles and subjects that I was studying. I don't know that they did, to be honest, but it's part of life. And that's where I think the book connects to what we have to do in reality and what the reality of a college student's life is. You can think about it as philosophically as you wish. I really can't determine that for you, but I'm just giving you a former college student's experience. And I will say that at the end of the day, there are hoops you're going to have to jump through for the government, for jobs that you're going to hold, and for careers that you might take. Every semester at Kish or Rock Valley or any other university I've worked at, I have to jump through hoops by completing mandatory training videos over health and safety issues, sexual harassment, topics like emergency medical protocols. Especially this semester like this, where no one is physically on campus. I can't help anybody from a distance, yet I still had to complete those mandatory trainings. And I would have been penalized or chastised had I not done that at the beginning of the semester. And that's a real headache, especially at the beginning of the semester when I've got so many other things to get done. But I had to get them finished. It was a hoop I had to jump through. So whether you think philosophically, as our authors do, that there is a more expansive, more, relatable set of circumstances that revolve around the concept of integrating new and conscientious material into your overall experience, in addition to courses that are focused on your specific learning path. Or if you just accept them as hoops that you have to jump through in order to get the degree to get on to what you want to do, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. Again, the focus here is more about attitudes and beliefs, and those are difficult to teach, honestly. So their belief system, the idea that if you don't think you're going to do well at something and you try and you end up not doing well or failing or getting worse results than you imagined, that's this old chestnut of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they're hopeful that you can avoid this if you think a little bit more expansively. And again, I think the key points from chapter 7 that were interesting and useful were: think about what is interesting in a class. If you don't like the class, fine. Think about what's interesting. Maybe the instructor is funny or insightful. Maybe there is a good study partner for you in that class. Maybe there are, it's at a certain time of the day or something like that that you enjoy. Maybe you like the place that you sit in the class or something like that. There's a nice window that gives you a nice view. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, try to find something about classes that are difficult, that you don't like, and focus on what's good about them. And realize that this is not a moment for you to fail or avoid failure, but a moment for you to enhance your already extant skills. Sometimes people believe that there is just a certain innate ability that people possess, whereas most of the time that's relatively not the case, or it's rare when that happens. Most people begin at a basic level. And it's your interests and motivation, your beliefs, and how you behave and perform as a student, and how these beliefs have built up inside of you that deserve a second look. For those habits, thoughts, and ideas that enhance the learning experience, embrace them. Continue to do what works. But if you're frustrated with a subject, or you're encountering the same old habits or routines because of the negative thinking that you've got going on, the stinking thinking, if you will, you should try to adapt and change those ideas, because through an adaptation and change, we learn and we grow. And that's the whole idea of what the college experience is all about. Okay, that's a little bit of a review over chapter 7. Some of that content will be offered up as a topic for questions, a topic for deeper investigation for week quiz 4 or weekly quiz number 4. Remember though, there are only 8 quizzes, so we are actually more than halfway through the quiz process for the course, if you can dig that. Alrighty, let's get into it. I'm going to cut out, but you'll still hear my dulcet tones as we investigate the next portion. All right, and again, I want to see this from the beginning. We're on to chapter 11 today, folks. Rehearsal and review. College Success Strategies, chapter 11. So our study questions, which we should use at the beginning of each session, and I invite you to go back and double check where the answers are throughout this PowerPoint presentation here at the beginning. So when we go through this, try to keep track of when I answer questions like, what are rehearsal strategies? Why is it important to know how to use a variety of them? What are the differences between rehearsal and review? And how can reviewing improve my memory? So, okay, what is rehearsing? I think when we imagine rehearsing, we imagine something like the image here on the left, okay? But when you're talking about rehearsing in terms of how it's used in our text, it simply refers to an engagement in activities, whether they're written or they're spoken, that will help you learn from a variety of sources. Of course, this could include anything that is, again, spoken aloud, written down, or even discussed with a classmate. This helps you to actually remember and learn. So why is it important? Well, in order to answer part of this question, we have to go back to chapter 3. So in chapter 3, we were exposed to 2 different theories of memory. Those 2 theories were the parts theory and the processing theory. Okay, so let's review those. What was the parts theory? Well, the parts theory regards 3 different ways or 3 different levels of memory or ways that we remember things. It's easiest to think of the memory as a sort of flow chart, okay? The first part of that would illustrate the sensory store, which is a kind of filter. Your senses, of course, are bombarded daily with information, much of which you don't remember or even can't remember. If you're asked to look up a number in the phone book, you don't look at every number. You put your finger down on a specific page until you find the number that you're looking for, or even better, you just use the white pages link or something like that. Or you access a number that you pre-recorded into your phone, okay? But whatever the case may be, when information enters into your senses, it is stored in your short-term memory. Okay? While it's in your short-term memory, it holds that information for maybe less than 30 seconds, unless you do something to retain it. In addition, short-term memory can also hold only a small number of items. However, you can do a couple of things to increase the amount of time material stays in the short-term memory. You can chunk information, grouping it together so that you have to learn fewer pieces. So like a 7-digit phone number, we break it into a 3-digit area code, a 3-digit prefix, and a 4-digit following number, or compound number. In addition to chunking information, you can move the information from the short term to your long-term memory. So long-term memory is relatively unlimited. Now I know that sounds like it's not true, but in point of fact, it is. It really never gets full. That's why I use the elephant in the Serengeti image, right? An elephant can find water, but rather than finding water every time because of an elephant's bulk and because of the association of elephants and memory, they tromp down the pampas grass. And they tromp down these grasses so often that they beat a path through the high pampas. That way it's easier for this memory to fire in a synapse in your brain and connect and find that information. Okay. Now, processing theory, all right, that is focused on the idea that the degree to which people can remember and retrieve information depends on the level or depth at which it's initially processed. So if you process information in a shallow manner, it's not going to be remembered very well. However, if you remember it in a deep and significant way, it's considerably easier to access that information. But no matter what method or theory you believe in order to encode that information and make it form meaning, you have to rehearse in some way. So in order to rehearse, the first thing that you need to do is organize your information and organize your thoughts. And you do that by pulling out key concepts and supporting concepts and then personalizing their relevance to you or elaborating on their significance to the greater ideas in a course, in a field or profession, or in preparation to assemble ideas together for a test or a quiz. Now, they break down the strategies for organization into two distinct camps, oral and written. So when it comes to oral presentations, they note that there are real distinct differences between talking and writing. Specifically, when you're thinking about the strategies that you use for oral organization, obviously these strategies are going to work well for auditory learners. And we're going to learn about those a little bit later in today's session. But the two main forms that they focus on are talk-throughs and reciprocal questioning. They spend quite a bit more time on written organization because it's recorded in an organized fashion, including today's focal points cards, or the cards system, concept maps and charts, question and answer sessions, and the use of timelines. Now, no matter what kind of rehearsal strategies you're going to use, the best rehearsal strategies have certain key characteristics that should highlight moments of enlightenment where you say, aha, I picked up something here that works for me. So the best rehearsal strategies usually allow for self-testing or monitoring what you know. And we'll see how they do that as we go through each of the examples. The best test strategies are also flexible, meaning that you can adapt and modify the ways in which you rehearse and personalize the process so that it works mostly for you, or it works in the best possible way. They also include complete and precise information, specifically information that you would pull from textual annotation and well-designed notes. Quick side track here. That's why I waited to talk about this chapter until after we had processed information about effective note-taking and the best ways to annotate a text. To just throw those out there without having delved into those topics would have been sort of fruitless. So that's why I saved some of these materials for later on. In addition, good rehearsal strategies usually involve some kind of organization, meaning that they're easily located and stored for your convenience. Not a lot of time that's needed to process this information. Ideas should also be stated in your own words in order, again, to emphasize that personal aspect of good rehearsal, because you're ultimately the one responsible for taking the test. Not your study mates, not your instructor, just you. So if you state the ideas in your own words, it's going to be a little easier to make sure that you can apply those ideas and concepts to your personal study habits and your personal rehearsal regime. Also, they help you, or I should say finally, they help you monitor and evaluate your learning. Okay, let's start with CARDS. CARDS, of course, is an acronym, also a mnemonic device. So for those of you who like mnemonics to enhance your memory, it stands for Cognitive Aids for Rehearsing Difficult Subjects. Essentially, they're flashcards, but with a key difference. They use something called an organizational term. Most of the time, you'll hear, and I think even the book repeats the idea, that when you use flashcards, you should focus on key ideas. That's true. So on one side of a flashcard, you would write a key term, and the other side is definition. But the CARDS system asks you to also write in the upper left-hand corner an organizational term. Because by doing this, you can see how ideas get grouped together, and this gives you a way to retrieve various forms of information. Of course, you should also include key terms on one side, and then on the same front of the card, you may want to also cite the source of information. Then on the back of the card, you'll write the definition that matches up to the key term, along with any examples or key points that you might want to include to help you remember the information. Here are a couple of examples of what that might look like. The front, of course, would have that organizing term in the upper right-hand side, then a key term here in the middle with a page number or date of a lecture in which it was presented. Then the back of the card would contain the definition along with examples and key parts. The benefits to using cards is that, number one, they're easy to carry. They can fit in your pocket, your book bag, backpack, and they can be easily stored. They're versatile, right? Meaning that you can use them in a variety of instances for any subjects. And they provide multiple ways to recall information. To use your cards or use the cards system most effectively, organize them according to their various topics so that they're connected. Start with one organizing term at a time, and maybe, if possible, when storing them, clip them together with a paper clip or other rubber band so that you can keep them in chunks of focused information. As you use them, separate what you learn and then focus on that material which is most difficult. Keep that near the top of the pile. And of course, it's always fun to review with a classmate, plus the chances are good that you'll both get something out of the entire process. Concept maps are another familiar method that you can use, another familiar written method of organization that you can use to enhance your cognitive enjoyment of a particular topic. They're also great for visual learners because they're highly visual in nature, and they illustrate relationships between very complex ideas. They're best used in courses where ideas are interconnected and related. So sciences and social sciences are probably some of the best areas to focus on to use concept maps. When you do use concept maps, you should rehearse one concept at a time, covering the map except for a singular concept and then talk the information through, meaning that you verbally, so you're bringing, even though this is a written example, you're bringing some verbally, some oral components into this, talk the information through, explaining how one concept links to another, and then slowly reveal that part of the map. As you do that, you should, of course, check for yourself for your accuracy to make sure that you are understanding how these ideas are related to one another. Whoa, sorry. Similarly, charting is another way to help you synthesize information and is very helpful when you're comparing and contrasting. So if you have a compare and contrasting essay project which is coming up, they recommend that you use a chart to begin that process. Start by looking at annotations in your textbook to generate categories on which to compare topics. Then develop a 4x4 grid, meaning 4 spaces in length and 4 spaces wide. Now, the vertical information, or the columns, are what you should study first. This is where you should focus your key ideas, your definitions, and your examples. Then, as you scroll through horizontally, you should note the rows of concepts and how their relationships are represented. Question and answer sessions are a lot of fun and very naturalistic, because I think we've started, most of us, I should say, I feel most of us have started using question and answer way back in our educational experience. But not everybody went to the same high schools, and not everybody had the same learning environment. So they bear a little bit of explanation. The first thing that's interesting about question and answer sessions is that you create the questions and you create the answers. This is an easy written format. You can just write questions on the left-hand side of a piece of paper and then write the corresponding answers over on the right. Then you can fold the paper and you've got a physical as well as written test bank that you can use to answer questions. But when you're answering questions, answer out loud, making sure that you check yourself after you've answered the question. And then, of course, from this point, it's relatively easy. You repeat the process until the information begins to sink in, making sure to mix up the order as you review frequently. Timelines, these are an interesting inclusion in your textbook. And I think your authors handled this one exactly the right way. They note that they're usually only appropriate for information that has to be remembered in a specific order, or the order in which a series of events occurred over a specific period of time. So obviously history courses, geology courses, things that are distinctly tied to a specific time or sequence are best used for outlines. You should use dates more as cues, and then talk through important events, making sure that you can understand the order in which they occur. And they suggest combining timelines with other written strategies to get the most out of the process, including writing questions or guide questions using the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, and how. Interesting that the W and how is at the end, but it's still a W, I guess. Okay, now for something completely different. We want to spend a little bit of time talking about oral study strategies. And the two they're going to focus on today are reciprocal questioning and with reciprocal questioning, you simply use more than one-word answers to respond to a fellow learner's questions. Now, in this scenario, one learner plays the role of the teacher and the other with the student. as one student quizzes the other, for each correct answer, this is easy, you move on to the next question. But if you miss an answer, instead of saying, oops, that's wrong, or you don't know, the student in the role of a teacher has to give you hints or suggestions until you reach the answer. Now, if you still can't reach the answer after a certain amount of pre-selected hints that you both agree upon, then those questions go into a separate pile. Once you have answered all of the questions correctly that you do feel good about, then you return to the missed questions, and those are repeated again with hints so that the student learner, or the learner in the student role, has the most amount of opportunity to remember and encode the information. And then, of course, once that process is completed, the two students exchange roles and repeat the process for the other student. Reciprocal questioning is good because it uses verbal, auditory, and kinesthetic strategies to enhance the learning process. Multiple perspectives are also one of the interesting features of reciprocal questioning, because another student might provide an insight or a concept that you hadn't considered previously. So for those reasons, it's really important that you have a good reciprocal questioning partner. Reciprocal questioning also enhances your understanding because it forces or requires you to use your own words. And using your own words is critical because your instructor may phrase questions differently. I know we had a quiz question recently where this was an issue. I phrased it slightly off from the textbook, and it created some frustrations and headaches for a few students. So questioning and using your own words to research topics will really help you to recognize information more easily. And of course, as always, as we said at the beginning of the lecture, right, every good rehearsal opportunity provides you with a chance to monitor your learning. And in this case, you get immediate feedback because you have another partner there to help you gauge your learning and give you a hint or suggestion as you move along. The second oral method that they discuss is what's referred to as a talk through. So when you are in a group or studying solo, you can talk out loud or silently, helping to remember the information. Now, this is again one of those odd memory theories, but it essentially suggests that when you talk out an answer, or when you talk out a process, you are able to take the skeletal-muscular memory. There is such a thing, a skeletal-muscular memory, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you take that skeletal-muscular memory and you encode it by using the actual movement of your jaw, your lips, your tongue, your cheeks. And sometimes, and I know this works because I've used it myself, if you talk through an answer and you come to a question, you need to draw a blank, starting the process, sometimes just starting the process of asking yourself the question quietly while you're speaking it, you can reconnect or ignite your memory in a powerful way. When you design a set of questions for a talk-through list, though, you should try to organize it, making sure that you focus on major concepts first, and then indent supporting ideas or examples as you're designing the list visually. Reread your ideas as soon as you can to check for your accuracy, and then try, as always, to make connections between supporting details and those major concepts. Again, the supporting details should be indented, the major concepts lined up with usually your left margin. here in the US. Now, it bears a little bit of emphasis to break down the distinctions between rehearsing and reviewing. They are different. Now, you might be calling in your heads or your own minds these rehearsal strategies review strategies, but they are slightly different, and here's why. Reviewing follows rehearsal in the preparation process. The distinction here is that with reviewing, you ensure that the information is memorized in a way that's complete, organized, and concise. Okay, that way it will stay fixed in your memory. So rehearsing is really what I think a lot of us think of when we think of the term or the idea or concept behind reviewing. That's actually rehearsing. I know that's strange. But then reviewing is shorter and a kind of complete, organized, and to the point. So it's not a very elaborate process. This quick fact-checking idea that is linked up with reviewing is more akin to this text's definition with reviewing and how it's distinct from and related to the rehearsal process. Now, no matter how you rehearse or review, you should create a specific study plan. And when you organize your SSP, you should ask some questions. What grade do I want to earn in the course or on the test or on the exam, in the quiz, what have you? How much time do I need to invest in the process of preparing myself for this objective task? And where am I going to find the extra time to do that? This is a tough question because this does require you to ask about whether or not you need to give up fun or interesting activities in order to get the information completed and learn that new material content. You should also ask a couple of practical questions. And I think these are the more valuable questions if you're asking my opinion. But just because I feel a certain way doesn't mean that that's going to be true for you. Just Mr. Fowler sharing some of his observations and expertise. So I think the more critical questions are, what type of exam is it, number one? So is it an objective essay? Is it a written essay or an essay exam? Do you know anything about the balance of questions? Meaning, what kinds of questions are going to be answered? If it's objective, are they mostly going to be multiple choice and true and false questions? For Mr. Fowler's quizzes, for example, the balance of those types of questions are reflective of what I pose to you each quiz. I also throw in some multiple correct choices questions. I don't think those are extremely popular, but I like them. So when you get to be an instructor, you can say, I hate these questions, I'm never going to have again. That's fine. But at least you can predict the balance of the types of questions Mr. Fowler is going to ask. I have asked a couple of short answer or short response questions too, and I may throw a couple of those into this next week's discussion question, just to bring some variety and to the process. And then, of course, what rehearsal strategies would work best based on the type of exam and the kinds of questions that you can expect. Your student study plan should include your own rehearsal and review strategies, as well as the concepts that you want to study and the length of the session that you can dedicate to the process. You should begin and end with a review. Now, does that sound familiar? It should. Every session begins with a preview of what we're going to talk about, and then we go right into a review of the previous assignment. Before we wrap things up, Mr. Fowler closes out his thoughts and reminds us about what to prepare for in the next session, right? The entire process is designed to help you. Okay. So for your specific or student study plan, you should, of course, begin and end at each session with a review. And in the days leading up to the individual test itself, try to monitor your understanding to make sure that your rehearsal strategies are working, and then concentrate on the remaining time on the most difficult material. The chapter wraps up with an idea about study groups. Now, I've used study groups in the past as well, only in limited capacities though, and I really wish I had used more study groups over my tenure as a student. So I suggest that if you're, especially if you sort of bulk at the idea of study groups, that you give them a chance. Try to get a little bit outside of your comfort zone and see if they might work for you. Obviously, right now, it's a little difficult to get a group of students together to study effectively. But because you do have the option to use Zoom, because you do have Google Chat and other group study sessions, it might be easier to use technology than one would initially think. So don't dismiss the idea of study groups because we're in an odd time with education. Now, one of the key benefits from study group is that you can listen to information in another person's voice. And this might help you gain a deeper understanding than the way you perceive information as it's delivered from, say, Mr. Fowler or your other instructors this semester. And it could help you just approach the coursework in a different way. But what is it that makes a good study group? Well, luckily, there are a few good characteristics that your book highlights. Good study groups observe traits which include everyone in coming prepared. So if you're going to lead the study group, don't just wing it. Make sure that you take on that responsibility and the obligation to lead the study group seriously. Make sure that you're organized. Make sure that all of your materials are ready to go. Also, remember that everyone can talk through a difficult idea. So even if you're not really well prepared for, or even if you don't have a great understanding of a particular topic, you do have the ability to talk through a concept, and that's where your study group partners can actually assist you. If you're willing to take the lead, even if you're kind of navigating through the fog, so to speak, you can do this, and it will help your fellow students probably actually relax them in many ways, because they'll know that, this also is a difficult concept. Try to select classmates and not limit yourself to your friends. You don't have to be great chums in order to have a good study group. You just have to share a course that you are interested and engaged in and that you want to enhance or do better in or perform better in by creating a study group. And of course, the last two are fairly straightforward. You should make sure that you have a conductive location. I've got this picture here, atypical dorm room. And it does seem like, at least at this moment, that it's a conductive location. I'm not sure how conductive that would be in reality. So you may want to rent or reserve a library research room, or for a regular study session, or find a place in the library that's conducive to research, so on and so forth. And then, of course, the best study groups include clear goals with a distinct structure. So when you get together, know what it is you're studying and for how long and what you need to accomplish. And keep that structure consistent from one meeting to the next. If you do these things, like I said, there are a lot of rewards to reap from study groups. And who knows, you may even make a new friend in the process. So we're going to wrap up this chapter with some practical advice about how to improve your memory. Memory is best enhanced by organization, number one. So if you're going to improve your memory or move memory from your short-term into your long-term memory so that you can recall it when it's needed, you need to make sure that your information is organized. And that's the first step in making sure that you can process, understand the relationship between it, and then hopefully move it into your long-term memory. Additionally, images and mnemonic devices like cards can help you to memorize specific facts and information. If you say it out loud as opposed to rereading it, you also have a better chance of making that information stick. Long time memory trick is when you meet somebody, say their name about 3 times. Oh, Jane Doe, it's nice to meet you. Shake her hand. I'm happy to meet, like, Jane Doe, that's an interesting name. Maybe Jane Doe isn't, but you could say that. You could say, so Jane Doe, in what capacity do you work in this process? And so when you say their name about 3 times in a row after meeting them, it helps to cement that name in there. So saying it out loud versus going back to reread it tends to have the information, or lends the information a stickier aspect so that it's more memorable and easier to access. And of course, as we said in this particular session, try to review not just once, but several times over the course of your learning, especially in preparation for a quiz, exam, test, what have you. Lastly, they suggest that it's worthwhile to investigate the process of overlearning a subject. Try to learn more about a particular subject or individual than you need to know in order to help you remember who they are or what that content has to do with the larger scheme of the ideas that you are discussing. Because if you overlearn about a topic, the chances are that you won't sweat it when it comes to a test, quiz, or other objective exam because you'll know the information forward and backward. Okay, that's it for today's session. Again, couple of reminders. Make sure that you complete the weekly quiz. It's over chapters 6 and 7 this week. And then when you have an opportunity in preparation for Wednesday's session, read chapter 12, Strategies for Social Science. That's found on pages 153 to 165 of College Success Strategies. A quick 10-page chapter, more or less. A lot of visuals, so the reading won't be that as intense. And again, this is just a focus on those social studies classes that you might have in college. So we're getting down, folks, to the nitty-gritty. What's left in the book over the next couple of weeks. We're going to tackle, like I said, social science on Wednesday, and then heading into next week, we're going to look at the humanities, courses like this one, in other words. And then next Wednesday, we'll focus on strategies for science and math. That will just leave us with technology and how to use it to enhance the learning process. So believe it or not, what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4 more chapters to go in 8 additional weeks, or I guess 7 after this week, about 7 additional weeks. So we'll be stretching those out fairly regularly. Okay, that's it for Mr. Fowler for today. I bid you a good rest of your week, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Take care, everyone.